Hey everybody, what's going on? Nolan, welcome. Good seeing you. He loved that, by the way. I am so glad to be back with you guys. This is awesome for kind of our second, Lunch and Learn, Faith Development Luncheon. Just as a brief recap, this whole thing was birthed out of this conversation that I had with JP last fall. I said, hey, what would it look like if we kind of got together at Live Oak, we started talking about kind of this idea of faith, and maybe what would it look like, to kind of to help you guys reframe the way we're looking at building a legacy and philanthropy. And he set me up with Kate, and I got to talk about the commitment that this bank has made to philanthropy and what you guys are doing. And in our first meeting, we kind of brought this concept to life of like, hey, listen, if we want to leave a legacy that extends beyond this campus, into this city, into this region, and then beyond that, what's going to sustain that? Right? What's going to sustain that kind of legacy? Because that's kind of like, as Jim Collins would say, a BHAG, right? A big hairy goal to leave a legacy that like shapes the world, And so we argued this idea that maybe it's not effectiveness that's going to let us do that. And I had everybody close their eyes and I said, imagine you're at your own funeral. And it's pretty powerful. Everybody closed their eyes and I said, now somebody stands up to give your eulogy, and imagine them saying that you lived an effective life. Now imagine them saying you lived a faithful life. How does that feel, right? Because Stephen Covey was the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So we said, you can be effective without being faithful, but if you're faithful, it will always lead to effectiveness. And so that's what we talked about the first time. And today, I want to kind of expand on that and say, listen, here's the deal. If there was like a title for this talk, right, it would be the idea that faith is active. Because I think a lot of us fall into the trap of believing that, faith is this thing where, I'm sitting in a chair and I'm waiting. And that's what faith is. And maybe it's prayer. Maybe it's going to church, or maybe it's even coming to an event like this. And while that's part of what this faith conversation looks like, what we want to say is that no, faith is active. Like faith is radically active. Like you've got to step into it. You've got to actually press into faith. One of the things that we say at Uprint is faith is a muscle that has to be exercised. A lot of us spend time like working on anybody working on your beach, like the summer fit thing, like I'm ready to get, and so you're going to go spend time working on kind of your faith development. You're going to kind of get in that thing. You're going to work on your personal fitness, but you kind of hesitate when it comes to your faith. We don't strengthen our faith. And what happens is too often we have that thing inside that we just can't not do, you know what I mean? And it's that thing, but we let fear get in the way sometimes. And what happens is we don't take the step, and instead we hesitate. And faith will never grow unless it's tested, unless you press into it. So I wanted to kind of kick off today's time with 3 ideas that you guys can kind of hold on to, because a lot of times in this conversation, it's kind of high level, right? And I want to kind of bring it into practicality. So number 1, in this idea that faith is active, faith has to be sustained by something. Your faith has to be sustained by something. And what that something is hope. It's kind of odd to talk about hope at a business setting, right? But think about this. Like, think about this when Chip and these guys were starting this bank. Did they hope that it failed? Did they hope it wasn't successful? Absolutely not. They had the hope that this was going to be what they saw it to be. They had hope that the faith they had to step into this thing was going to actually mature. So the way I like to think of it is this, to give you guys kind of a practical thing. Have you might have been to the Grand Canyon? Few? Is it worth checking out? Yes. Right? Okay. I've never been. Okay. So anybody's, road trip, I'm willing to come along. But imagine we're on a road trip to the Grand Canyon. And you guys kind of stop and picture that for a minute, Picture this like standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. For those of you who have been there, you can kind of see this. But for those who haven't, just picture what that looks like. Completely taken in by this beauty, by this just open expanse of just this canyon, right? Now, think of it this way. That's the destination on a road trip where we want to go. Okay, that's that faith. That's that thing that we see, right? That's that philanthropy. That's that legacy we want to leave. That's that impact. That's that great thing that we want to do. If we're driving there, guess what we're going to need? Gas, right? We're going to need gas in the tank. So what's the gas in your tank? The gas in your tank is hope. You have to have daily little fuel to walk this thing out. And so the thing I like to say is that In order for faith to kind of grow, it has to be fueled with hope. It has to be these little daily victories, these daily things that we hold on to, and that hope is what encourages us to kind of take that next step forward, and then that next step forward, and then that next step forward, and that's how faith has grown. That's how we kind of walk this thing out. So, the hope that we see in this analogy are some of the stories that Kate shares about what Live Oak is actually doing in this community. Those are the hopeful stories that fuel us. Jimmy's going to share his testimony. That's the hope that we see that, you know what? This is actually making a difference that keeps us moving toward that destination. And so that's the kind of way we like to think about this. And so if faith is active, it has to be fueled by hope. All right, that's number one. The second thing I want to focus on today is this idea that in this process of growing faith, in this process of taking action, we cannot let what is very good keep us from what is best. We cannot let what is very good keep us from what is best. I have a question for you. How many bests are there? One. There's only one best. There are not multiple bests. So how many of you, by show of hands, want the best for your life? Right? Everybody. I don't think there's anybody that says, you know what? I want to be in, they don't have like a joke, they don't have like a loser section at the library. You know what I mean? It's like everybody has this aspiration for greatness. They want the best for their life. So we cannot let what is very good keep us from what is best. Imagine this road trip thing, carrying on this analogy. If we're driving to the Grand Canyon, let's say we hit the Mississippi River. And we're like, you know what? This is beautiful. This is awesome. I'm going to set up shop here, and I'm going to build my house on the banks of the Mississippi, But you got to remember, don't let what is very good keep you from what is best. If your vision of best is the Grand Canyon, you have to carry on, because what you'll find in life is you hit these circumstances, these trials, these challenges that we all face. And that's where we have to continue to step in and press forward. I have a good friend, his name's Tom Morris, and Tom is a fantastic speaker. He's probably one of my speaking mentors. I actually called him up this morning to tell him that I was going to share this. This is where I learned it from. And it was so awesome to catch up with him for like 30 minutes, because Tom travels all over the country speaking to Merrill Lynch and Microsoft and you name it. I mean, he's wonderful. And Tom shared this with me originally. He said, Matt, I like to think of this as Hill A and Hill B. Imagine that you're out in the woods and you kind of set to climb that mountain, that highest peak. And from your perspective, from your vantage point, that's Hill A that stands right in front of you. And so you set out and you work hard and you strive and you fall and you get up and you keep going until you finally come to this summit, this Hill A. And you stand up and you look around and you're like, man, this is pretty awesome. I have climbed this mountain. I have taken this step, and now I am here. And you look around from that perspective, and all of a sudden the fog starts to clear, and in the distance you see a higher Hill B. I think that comfort and complacency kill more dreams and more faith than we could ever imagine. Comfort and complacency. Because what happens is you kind of get to that point, you're like, I got it. I'm getting this thing. I'm comfortable. And then complacency sets in, and then apathy sets in. Guys, we weren't built and made to just live a comfortable life. We're built for that best, that end in mind. And so we have to kind of step into that, right? And what that requires from the top of Hill A is that descent. You got to go back down the mountain in order to climb the higher mountain, right? And so I want to just introduce this idea to you guys in your own kind of walk in your own life, in this whole conversation about faith, and how that affects your giving and your engagement in this community is, are you settling for Hill A? Where are you settling? Have you grown complacent in certain areas? You still have your eyes and your heart set on that Grand Canyon, right? That Hill B. Because life is about that climb. Life is about that pursuit. It's about moving forward with that confidence. And that's what faith is taking those steps. I'll never forget when I first felt this inclination to speak. You have to realize I'd never done this before. I had never spoken. And I was asked to speak at my grandfather's funeral. My grandfather, at 71 years old, committed suicide. It's the hardest thing I've ever gone through in my life to that point. I was 19 years old. This man was my rock. It's my grandfather. He's a wonderful man. We actually had breakfast like every Friday at the Goody Goody Omelet House on Market Street. If you hadn't been, you better go. The place is the heat. Miss Mayhew is a hero in this world. It's so good. It's so good. And my grandfather and I would go every Friday. And so my grandfather got diagnosed with lung cancer 6 months after he retired. And he always said, Matt, when you finish summer school, I'll be done with my cancer treatments. And I was home one weekend with some friends, and I got that call that something's happened to your grandfather. And my grandfather, in the battle of lung cancer, he was not winning. And he had some other things going on with some medications and so forth. But my grandfather took his own life on a Sunday morning. It's the hardest thing that I have ever experienced. You know, and as I reflected on that, that could have been one of those moments that caused me to pause, that could have caused me to stop, to give up, to not move forward. And then I was asked by my family, the 19-year-old, to stand up on stage at my grandfather's funeral and speak. It was way over my head. But I'm not going to lie, when I stood up there and spoke, there was a spark of something here that I knew that God was doing something with this. I knew He was working in me to bring this to a bigger purpose. And so in 2013, when I really felt that call to speak, I saw these things in my life that had led me to this point. This was always there. It was always inside. It just had to be matured. It had to be grown. I had to continue to step forward. And so I just want to encourage you guys that a lot of times your own story is going to give you the insight you need on how you need to step forward. You might say, well, I don't know what that destination is. I believe that we do. One of the things Jimmy will share is Jimmy's always had a heart for teenage kids. He's always had that in him. He was a teacher and a coach. And he's going to talk about that more, but you've got this seed, right? This seed, this thing planted in you. That's what we call a U-print, right? That's what God has placed in you. And He wants to leave His fingerprints on the world through yours. But you got to know what that is and what that looks like, and you got to step into it. And the final thing I'll share today to kind of frame this conversation is this idea, is that God is more concerned with us working and acting from who we are than acting for what we want. Think about this for a second. God wants us to move and act from who we are, not for what we want. Now, it doesn't neglect diligence. It doesn't neglect hard work. But that hard work has to be from our identity. There's so many people that are taking action and they're climbing the wrong ladders. They're climbing the wrong ladders. And what happens is that cycle of stress and frustration and exhaustion that we feel sometimes is because we might be working for what we want instead of from who we are. You see, identity, being, always moves our doing. Our doing doesn't define our being. Right? That's this idea that like you tell your kids to like be thankful for the underwear that grandma gave you or for the socks that grandma gave you, right? And so like, thank you, grandma. You know, and they kind of walk away like this. Like that's not gratitude, right? That's not thankfulness. They said thank you, they did the right thing, but true gratitude and thankfulness and things like that, it comes from this place of feeling it, right? It comes from the heart, from the identity. So, that being said, as we tie that into what we're trying to do here to build this legacy and talk about philanthropy and how we get engaged, what's the thing you can't not do? What's the thing you can't not do? Because here's the deal. Once you find that thing and step into it, the favor will follow. One of my favorite books of all time is The Alchemist. Anybody read The Alchemist? Love that book. Love that book. And what Paulo in that book says, and what he writes about Santiago, the shepherd boy who's in search of his personal legend, when you know your personal legend, as he calls it, that's the faith in this analogy that I'm talking about, The universe will conspire to help you achieve it. You know, you'll see the winds of favor kind of blow in your direction as you are stepping into who you are. Because, listen, if God placed His thumbprint on us, would you not think that He wants that thumbprint on the world? And so you'll find as you step into that the favor will follow. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, a caveat. Faith does not mean that we all need to go dig wells in Africa. I think the Western church has messed up in this mindset that if you have faith, the stepping in means vocational ministry. It means I got to go quit and get involved in a nonprofit, or I got to go dig wells in Africa. I want to debunk that right now today. You guys have as much opportunity to influence this community for faith as anyone digging a well in Africa. As any pastor in a pulpit, there is no difference. But you have to know who you are. You have to take that step into that greatness. And you have to have those little hope nuggets every single day. So, in 15 minutes, guys, I try to be brief with this, but I want you guys to walk away with this and feel this, like really feel this. Because when faith is acted out and we have those three components that we've talked about today, you'll watch some incredible stuff happen. And Jimmy's a testimony of that. The last thing I'll say is this. Every single hero that you could possibly read about in the Bible took radical faith in the face of something that seemed crazy. Abraham left home. Moses, a stuttering murderer, went back to Pharaoh. Joshua circled Jericho. David ran after Goliath. Peter dropped his nets and followed Jesus. Jesus went to the cross, and Saul was transformed and established the early church. Every single breakthrough in the history of God's story is at the behest of what makes sense. But it was these people knowing who they were and feeling that higher thing and stepping into it, strengthening that faith, and watching God's favor kind of carry it out. So I hope that gives you guys some things to kind of grab hold of today. And now I have the privilege to sit down and let you guys hear from Jim Mahan, for Jimmy. And I met Jimmy originally through Chad Reed in, Jimmy, what was it? Probably 2009, 2010, something like that. And man, just loved this guy's zeal for life, And I knew what was going on at the bank, and I was just amazed at it. And as we kind of got to know each other and know him and Kathy and hear their story, I was just really inspired by it. So as we talk about this idea of faith taking action, this was a great opportunity for us to hear from Jimmy. So if you guys would, let's welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
You know it. I do here. Hold on.
You get settled.
Yeah.
So, Jimmy, I think that you don't need much of an introduction in this room, but I want to really highlight kind of what your story's been like, and how it just it radiates this idea of faith in action.
So I've had a crazy life. It's really cool actually looking around because different people here have been instrumental in parts of it, not just. My sister obviously works here. My dad is Chip, who you all know. I'm sorry in advance for a lot of things he does. But, Tyler, I don't know how many of y'all know this, was one of my campers when I was a counselor at Camp Seagull. JP, I was his academic counselor when I worked at the University of Kentucky.
Need a lot of help.
Yeah, right. That was easy. I was like, man, you just do your thing. I got to go worry about this guy. Go on with it. But it's interesting. So I was a history major, worked with kids, all these different things. And then I was a teacher and just a coach up in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And then worked at the University of Kentucky for a couple of years as the academic counselor for the team. And then came back to teaching and coaching. And then actually was a high school principal in my 20s at a very small school. And then I was just tired at age 29 from fighting a bunch of parents in Pinehurst. And I was like, I need to take a little break. I can always come back to this. I'm going to do something else. And my dad my dad, as intense as he can be, was never a high-pressure dad on me. It's not fun to bring a report card home to him, that's for sure. But he was always do what you love. It was never a following the footsteps of the family business. So it's funny because a lot of people focus on what I'm doing now as a real step out in faith. But it took a lot for me to come be a banker. That was never in my DNA, ever in my DNA. But I was here when it was 3 of us at my dad's house filling out the FDIC application to become a bank. It was me, David Luck, Dad, and our golden retriever. And that was it. And we'd report to work every day in my dad's garage office for a long time. And watching it grow to the point where this building was built, it took a lot for me to, you talk about that voice inside of what's best for you. I never saw it in a corporate setting. But at the time, everything was saying, you need to go do this, you need to go do this. And I figured out later why. But got to know everybody, MJ and everybody else from here, growing up through that. During that time, an interesting thing that had a profound effect on my faith is I ended up going through 14 surgeries. Once this building was built, I had my hips replaced at age 32. I had 7 shoulder surgeries, 5 hip surgeries, elbow surgery, hand surgery, and as Live Oak was growing and I was traveling the country, I used to run marketing here. Luckily, I hired Micah, who's about 4 million times smarter than me, and put him in charge. But I can't tell you what that time did for my faith that led to Cross Nor and all this, which we'll get into. But when you go to the doctor, and every 3 months for 5 years, you have a surgery. And ended up at the Mayo Clinic, getting my hips replaced and all this. And you're on 4 million medications, all this. And every time you go to the surgery, they say, all right, we got it fixed. 3 months later. All right, we're going to fix it. All right, we got it fixed. 3 months later. All right, we got it fixed. Do that 14 times. And see what it does to your mind and all that. And it's hard because it breaks you down to that lowest common denominator. Where I remember thinking, you know what? It doesn't matter my salary, how many friends I've got, family, education, all that. This is down to just me and God. Can you get me through this? I didn't know what my life was going to be after that. And I think that prepped me quite a bit to the point where I could step out and make the move, which I would later do to Cross Nor, which is a school up in the mountains. And I don't know, you want me to just keep rambling?
No, man, it's great. One of the things to hear is like, you know, in this idea of faith, you know, being challenged, right? You know, there was a hope that you held on to.
Oh, no. And it was hard. I mean, it was hard. I was not at the point where I didn't want to live, but I was like at the point where if you got to take me to glory, let's rock. Because I was living in a hospital bed in my living room. And you don't sleep and all these different things. And I was trying to get up and come to work every day that I could, but that wasn't always working. But your father's the CEO, and you don't want to look like you get any extra, you know, incentives or benefits from that, and you want to grind and you want to work anyway, but your body didn't let you. And that was the hardest time of my life, no question to this point.
Do you think letting go of like, so a lot of times, like I know for me, is like there's this bootstrap mentality. You know what I mean?
Man,
like when you hit that wall, like, I'm gonna pick myself up. But I think letting go of that mentality, you know what I mean, is really what lets you flourish.
I had to say, because you know my dad too, there's very much a bootstrap mentality. Like you got to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and go for it. And it was like, I can't. And I had to go and get on my knees. And I'll never forget it. And I was like, I lived over in Forest Hills in a little teeny house, my wife. There's a little church over there. I haven't told this story very often, but I got up and walked to the church one morning. And I was like, I've got to get out of this. And I don't know what to do. And I signed up to go back to Mayo. And they were like, well, it's going to be a month wait, extra month wait before we can get you in to look at this and help you do this. And I was like, and I just went to the church and I sat in the courtyard. It was like a Tuesday. And I was like, Lord, I can't do it anymore. I've tried to do it my way. My friends can't help. My family can't help. I don't know what to do. And I've got to give this to you because I'm not going to make it without you. Mm-hmm. And this is real. I really haven't told this story. And I didn't feel much of anything, but I said it. I got it off my chest, sat out there, and I was walking home. And I swear this happened. It sounds like a movie. But a dove flew up from right by my feet. And like when I was halfway home, and I walked in the house, and Mayo called and said, we got you in next week. And then after that, I hadn't looked back. Now, 2 months later, I was up in the mountains. My parents have a house up there near Crossmore, and we were having lunch. And this lady, the maitre d', knew my parents and said, hey, have y'all ever seen that school over here? I heard about you, Jimmy. I've never met you, but I know you used to be a teacher. Have y'all ever seen that? And I was like, what school's that? They said, well, there's this residential home. It's all for abused, neglected children, and some are orphans, but all of them are wards of the state. And I said, no, let's go look. I mean, I'm just healing up from surgery. Let's go check it out. So we rode over there, and we rode around on a golf cart, getting a tour of this school. And it took 5 minutes, and I was just zeroed in, focused. I couldn't get enough of it.
No.
We were supposed to fly home that night from the mountains, and I looked at my wife. I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to go. I just don't think I'm supposed to go. I'm going to stay. I'll just drive one of the cars here home. So Mom and Dad, my wife flew home to Wilmington, and I called the CEO, and I met with him at Crossnor and did a 4-hour tour with him, just walking and talking about kids, what they do, how it works, my background, his background. And his law school buddy was actually a Camp Seagull counselor that was my counselor. And I couldn't get enough. I said, I'm coming back in a week. And I couldn't sleep that night. It was already late. And then I got in the car and I drove through the night back to Wilmington, and I showed up, and you know, my wife's the real hero in all this, and I showed up with 2 applications and said, I think we need to quit Live Oak and move to the mountains. And she said, I think so too. And within a week, we were going up there. Within a month, we had gone from living in a big house on a golf course in Wilmington and flying around the world for Live Oak to commuting 5.5 hours every week and being house parents for 9 high school girls. That's what I really should have prayed about. I prayed a lot. Oh my God.
Oh man.
And we would, for these children, they're all, I mean, I could spend an hour just doing the craziest stories you've ever heard. You've ever heard. Like, you think about that stuff and you like watch Criminal Minds, and you're like, nah, man, that ain't real. Suppressed memories. Come on. No, it's real.